Our God goes right for the heart. Imagine you're standing outside the building after worship on a Sunday. A man falls to the ground, clutching his chest. 911 is called. The emergency unit arrives. 2 paramedics jump out. They run up to the situation. They take one look, and one of them says, "What a mess! Look at his tie. It's crooked. Look at his hair. His shoes are all scuffed." The other one says, "You're right. I'm going to run back to the van, get a brush, some hairspray. You shine his shoes while I'm doing that. We got to get this guy looking good while he's lying here on the sidewalk." Well, of course, we chuckle at that because it's ridiculous. We know that they couldn't care less about cosmetic appearances. What do? They go for the heart. God has little interest in our appearances. We're the ones that are interested in that outside stuff. Credentials, who you are, how you come off, business cards, titles, diplomas, honors. Yeah, I kind of would like to think that I could stop God when he comes to probe my heart and say, "Just a moment, I want you to see some stuff on the outside here, Lord. I grew up in a Christian home. I married a cute Christian girl. We had 2 great kids. I preached my first sermon when I was 14. I graduated with honors from an accredited Bible college, Lord. I sang in a professional quartet for 40 plus years. I've been preaching for 40 years. He doesn't even notice. He doesn't hear me. He says, "I'm not impressed. I want to see your heart." Reminds me of Joel chapter 2, verse 13. "Rend your heart, not your garments." In other words, take care of the inside, not the outside. 2 Chronicles chapter 16, first part of this chapter. We're going to be spending some time in the next couple of weeks. It starts out with these words in verse 1, "In the 36th year of Asa's reign," and by the way, he had 35 years had it pretty good. Things were fairly peaceful. One big skirmish that he had, war that he had, but otherwise pretty calm. But in the 36th year, Baasha, king of Israel, that's when the kingdom was divided. So we're talking about the 10 tribes from the north, always fighting against the 2 in the south. So Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah, fortified Ramah to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. It's kind of like he just laid siege to all of Judah. Asa then took the silver and gold out of the treasuries of the Lord's temple and of his own palace and sent it to Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, who was ruling in Damascus. So you see, now we have a third individual here. You see the picture? You've got Asa in Judah being attacked from the north by Israel, or being laid siege to. So he brings in a third king, a pagan, Ben-Hadad, who is the king of Aram, which would be north and east of Judah. And here's what he says. He sends for him and he says, "Let there be a treaty between me and you," he said, "as there was between my father and your father. See, I'm sending you silver and gold, also known as a bribe. Now break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so he will withdraw from me. Ben-Hadad agreed with King Asa and sent the commanders of his forces against the towns of Israel, and they conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel, Maim, and all the store cities of Naphtali. When Baasha heard this, he stopped building Ramah, and he abandoned his work. And Asa probably thought at that point, whew, pressure's off, he's backed away, this worked. Then King Asa brought all the men of Judah. They carried away from Ramah the stones and the timber that Baasha had been using, and with them he built up Geba and Mizpah. At that time, Hanani the seer, the prophet, came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, and I'll just bet you at this point Asa's thinking, man, he's going to tell me how pleased God is with the great plan that I had to bribe this other king. No. Because you relied on the king of Aram and not on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Aram has escaped from your hand. Were not the Cushites and Libyans a mighty army with great numbers of chariots and horsemen? He's referring back to a time earlier when Asa was facing an impossible situation. It would be like thousands against a few hundred. He says, and God says, remember that? Yet when you relied on the Lord, he delivered you, or he delivered them into your hand. And then our key verse, for the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. You have done a foolish thing, and from now on, you'll be at war. Powerful story, and especially a powerful verse there, verse 9. And one thing that hasn't changed, God is still looking for a few good hearts. God is looking for a few good hearts. And the Bible has a lot to say about the heart. The heart, that's the inner person. The heart, that's the whole personality. It includes the passions, the thoughts, the understanding, the will. The heart is the authentic me. It's the authentic you. It's who we really are. And the heart is where God meets us, where God encounters you and me on a daily basis, and he's looking for some good ones. God is looking for a few good hearts. I want to credit Joseph Stoll. He's been around for quite a while as a solid, strong pastor, teacher. He was president of Moody until 2006. Then he went to Harvest Bible Chapel as their pastor, and that was in the Chicago area. Now he's at Cornerstone University up in Grand Rapids, and some of the key ideas that I want to use in this message I found in reading some of his work. You see, Christianity is an inside-out phenomenon. How is it with you on the inside? Hollow? Is your life propped up on the inside with a bunch of externals? Kind of like the Tin Man, Wizard of Oz? Are you always maintained by the latest book, the latest DVD, the newest app, the most popular television or radio Christian personality, celebrity? Where does the vibrancy of your faith actually come from? You see, a good heart that God's looking for really is the same as saying a fully committed heart. A good heart is a fully committed heart. Asa, his great-grandfather, was Solomon. He comes from a great line. David to Solomon to Rehoboam to Abijah to Asa. Great stock. And he started out unflinchingly loyal. If you read the story of Asa from the beginning, he goes in at the beginning of his reign, he tears down the idols. He has enough fortitude to stand up to his own grandmother, who was a wicked queen, Maacah. And he sees that she is deposed. And in chapter 15, we're in 16, but in chapter 15, the 14th verse, these words about Asa: his heart was fully committed to the Lord. But he got in a tough spot. Trapped by the king of the north. And he could have done as before. He could have called upon God. God had always delivered him before. Always delivered him from the Amorites and the Hittites and all those other guys who wear tights. But instead, he goes to the temple, newly built under Solomon, his great-grandfather. He goes to the temple, and he takes the gold and the silver offerings that the people had given. He takes the gold and the silver also from his own palace, and he strikes an alliance with the enemy, with King Ben-Hadad of Aram. Sound familiar? The world just tugs at us to abandon our loyalty. I don't think the world tugs any harder than it does at the Christian single woman today. Feeling pressured to marry. She can forget that God honors singleness. At 16, she carries a list with her of the 25 qualifications for a husband, a believer with a strong, committed heart. And the list goes on. But when she reaches her 30s, still unmarried, the list dwindles. And basically it just says qualifications: warm and breathing. She strikes an alliance with the world, see? Joseph Stoll tells about a Detroit businessman that came to his pastor one day, and this man was a new Christian. He'd been climbing the corporate ladder very successfully. He had all the trappings, the beautiful home, the boat in the driveway. He was head of a cable TV company. And he told his pastor, "Yesterday I quit." He said, "I quit because I need to be a man after God's heart, and I cannot market unrighteousness any longer." Pastor said, "Okay, well, that's very honorable. Tell me about your new job." He said, "I don't have a job. I'm moving to Minnesota to live with my parents." There's a Christian in a tight spot that remained unflinchingly loyal, that refused to strike an alliance with the world. And when Stoll told that story, he said, that man left town with his heart showing. Our God is looking for a few good hearts. And a good heart is one that is fully committed. Well, how do you know whether or not that heart that is your heart, how do you know if it's fully committed? How can I measure my heart's commitment? Well, there are some measures, I think. You go to the doctor and there's lots of measures. Weight, height, blood pressure, pulse, etc. We're going to turn to the New Testament for some measurements of a heart, okay? And even more specifically, we're going to look at some words of Jesus today. Some words of Jesus that tell us how to measure our hearts, how to know whether or not we have that fully committed heart that the Father is constantly seeking. Number one measure. Our hearts are measured by our treasures. Our hearts are measured by our treasures. If you look at the closing part here of the Sermon on the Mount, I think these words will be somewhat familiar to you, the words of Jesus. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Now listen, for where your treasure is, there your heart, there it is, there your heart will be also. There's a great measure to know just how committed our hearts are when we take a look at our treasures. Now, everybody wants a good deal, right? I read about a guy who went into a gift shop, and he saw two identical wooden deer on the shelf, and he picked one up to check the price, and on the bottom it said $34.90, $34.90. Well, just out of curiosity, he set that back, and he took the other one and looked at it, $54.90. He said, I couldn't resist the savings of the $20. So he bought the $34.90 deer, and he said, feeling very, very pleased with himself as he left, he heard one saleswoman say to the other, it never fails. It never fails. Because we all are looking for the good deal. Those words of Jesus that we just read, he's telling us that is the ultimate deal. Make your investment in high values. This is not so much a passage about money. This is more a passage about values. It's about our priorities, our treasures. What is important to you? You see, directly proportionate to where you invest your energies and your resources, directly proportionate to that will be your heart. And the key question, when you look at your treasures, is not the interest rate. No, not the interest rate. But this question, is it eternal? Do you catch the contrast that Jesus is giving here? He says in verse 19, the ungodly heart, the uncommitted heart, invests in the temporal. He calls those treasures on earth. Easily defined. Easily defined. If you're wondering, well, how do I know? Anything that's not eternal is temporal. And anything that is temporal should not be prioritized. Financial gain, material goods, physical strength, we go on and on. That's the world's bank of treasures. And one day, the World Bank is going to go bust. To invest here, that is, in the temporal, here on earth, to invest in that is actually idolatry. It's worshiping the temporal. When a man gets to the end of his life, Iacocca said this, when a man gets to the end of his life and looks back, he rarely, if ever, will say, I should have spent more time with my business. Temporal. The ungodly heart invests in the temporal. The godly heart invests in the eternal. Well, how can we define that? I mean, the temporal is pretty easy. It's anything that's not eternal. How do you define the eternal? I want to, at the risk of being too simplistic here, I want to say, basically, there are two. There are two that are listed, two items that are listed under eternal. One is God, and anything connected with Him, His Word. God is eternal, and the other is people. People are eternal. Pretty simple. Where are your treasures? You want to know whether or not your heart is committed? Where are your treasures? Are they invested in what is eternal, or what is temporal, because God is looking for a few good hearts. And that's one measurement, treasures. We're going to look at another measurement today before we conclude, and that is thoughts. Now, we were in Matthew 6, looking at treasures. Just turn over to Matthew 9. We have a scene here where Jesus is with some of the teachers of the law, or they are at least very nearby. And they're always mumbling back and forth, whispering, to one another while he's speaking. And it says here, knowing their thoughts, Jesus said to them, why do you entertain evil thoughts in your heart? Where? In your hearts. Knowing their thoughts. Wow. Does that lend credence to the deity of Jesus? Knowing their thoughts. Jesus, the mind reader. Can you imagine if the 12 had been really fully aware of the fact that Jesus could read minds? Can you imagine how uncomfortable they would have been during those 3 years with Jesus? I mean, it sure make me uncomfortable if any of you could know my thoughts. I think things that I should not. The root awakening here is to see that those come from my heart. That's what Jesus is saying here. He's talking about those darkened closets of the brain where nobody else, we think, invades. Where the fantasies of revenge, of cheating, of lust, and of pride occur. Now, I want to be careful here about this when we're talking about thoughts, because thoughts alone are not necessarily sinful. But Jesus uses a word here that I think shows us the difference between just a thought and a sinful thought. He says, why do you entertain evil thoughts? Not just why do you have evil thoughts. Why do you entertain evil thoughts? You look that word up and it talks about reflecting on, pondering deeply. I think the New English Bible says harboring evil thoughts. That's what entertain is all about. I like that word entertain, because do you entertain an intruder or a thief that comes into your house? And yet that's what evil thoughts really are like. That's what they are. No, we entertain guests who are welcome. We say to a guest that is welcome, come on in, stay a while, have a seat, let me get you something to drink or something to eat, and do come back again. That's what entertaining is. And Jesus is saying, if you take evil thoughts, you start entertaining them, hang around, let's get to know each other, your heart is laid bare. And God sees it for what it is. And God is looking for a few good hearts. He's looking for hearts that show that their treasure is in the eternal. He's looking for hearts that have thoughts that are righteous and that are entertaining righteousness. He was a colonel in the Continental Army. He was vice president of the United States of America. His father was a preacher. The second president of Princeton University. His grandfather, Jonathan Edwards. What heritage? All that religious training. But he had a strong will, And he had a powerful personality. And Aaron Burr is not considered one of the great forefathers of America. Why? SMI. Had a doctor in the church in Oregon that used to use that phrase with his patients. They'd say, what have I got? He'd say, you've got SMI? Oh my God, what is that? Something the matter inside. Aaron has something the matter inside, something wrong in his character, in his heart. He was on George Washington's staff, but he was transferred because of differences. Actually, he was a huge critic of Washington. Burr once saved an entire brigade from capture, but he defied orders in order to do so. Burr was politically successful in the New York State Assembly, appointed Attorney General, U.S. Senate, and eventually Vice President to Jefferson, but there were some illegal politics there in New York. There were rumors that he tried to wrest the presidency from Jefferson. And along came Alexander Hamilton, and he seemed to see the inner man, the heart problem. And he opposed him publicly until it came to that famous duel where Burr killed Hamilton. In 1807, he was tried for treason. He was exonerated, but he left the country and he went to Europe where he lived immorally and borrowed funds. And later on, he returned to New York disguised, and he set up a law practice and finally died a lonely man. He looked good on the outside to a lot of people, to a lot of voters, to a lot of leaders, but he had a heart problem. God is looking for a few good hearts. And what is a good heart? It is a heart that is fully committed to Him. That's why today's message, and next week we'll continue in this, is called A Spiritual EKG. How about our hearts, people? I can't see your heart very well. Even Alexander Hamilton was probably guessing about what he saw at times in Aaron Burr. I certainly do not have a right to judge your heart, do I? But the Bible is very clear that God just looks right through all that outside stuff when He looks at us. And He sees the heart. He sees it clearly. I think of that old song, Search Me, O God, which is also a psalm, not just a song. First it was a psalm. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Know my heart. Let's stand together, and let's allow the one who knows our heart better than any, let's allow Him to do some physician work. What does that mean? Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes there's surgery. And sometimes it gets pretty close to death itself, it seems like, to have our hearts put back in order. Let Him deal with that heart today as we sing and offer the invitation to any who want to make Jesus Lord of their lives. Offer an opportunity for prayer. If you want to go to the back and spend some time with Chris, Gina. If you want to spend some time in prayer up here, that's fine. Let's let the Lord deal with our hearts. Would you leave us?